Turks. Jake Huger, Anna Kasparian with you guys. Hey, we might be in the middle of nuclear war.
No,
soon.
don't say that.
Allah korusun. Okay. I think that there's a lot of American news shows that start with "May God protect us" in Turkish. Okay, so look, we're gonna give you all the details, including the heroic behavior of the Ukrainians again and again and again. And yes, the very dangerous situation that we find ourselves in. But today's a giant day, guys. We have Texas primaries. If you're in Texas and you haven't voted yet, rush out and vote for a progressive. Jessica Cisneros in the race today. Tons of other candidates. Check out tyt.com/canvas2022. State of the Unions tonight. We got war, State of the Union, and Texas primaries all in one day. So that's right after this show at 8 o'clock Eastern. So don't miss a minute of it. Speaking of not missing a minute of anything, let's get to the news.
Yeah, we have a lot of updates to get to in regard to the war in Ukraine. And so sit tight and just understand that things change rapidly with the situation. So everything I'm giving you is what we have in terms of the most current information. But if you end up watching a video later, things are likely to change. With that said, here's where we're at now. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine has escalated, with Vladimir Putin becoming even more aggressive. And now we see that there is a 40-mile-long Russian convoy headed toward Kyiv or Kyiv, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is pretty terrifying. So far, it appears, as we speak, the convoy has kind of stalled, but the thinking is that the whole point of the convoy is to encircle Kyiv and essentially isolate the capital and ensure that the Russians can capture the capital through this strategy. So as you look at the imagery, you can see the Russian convoy that I'm speaking of. And there are other updates to be concerned about, including increased bombings, especially in the major cities like Kyiv and Kharkiv. For instance, there was a television tower, as you can see in that photo, that was targeted, and obviously that was an attempt to cut Ukrainians off from any information that could be broadcast to them through that television tower. We also know that the United Nations said that at least, and these numbers are of course likely to change and are very likely to be an underestimate, 136 civilians, including 13 children, were killed in just the first 5 days of this war. Today marks day 6 of the war. On Tuesday morning, meaning today, an explosion devastated a large administrative building in the main square of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, killing 7 people, and that's according to Ukrainian officials. Again, as Cenk likes to say over and over again, and I want to repeat right now, with the whole fog of war, certain things aren't 100% confirmed yet. So I want you guys to understand that it's a fluid situation. Numbers, death tolls, things like that are very likely to change. But what's very clear is that there's no mistake about it. Russia is in fact targeting residential areas, apartment buildings are getting attacked and targeted, and unfortunately we're seeing more and more civilians dying as a result. More than 660,000 people have fled Ukraine. They've gone to neighboring countries, including Poland, Romania. We've given you specific stories of people trying to flee the country, looking for safety. We also know Moldova, Hungary, Slovakia, all of these countries surrounding Ukraine are taking these refugees in, although there is a little bit of discrimination, unfortunately, when it comes to which refugees they're willing to take in, a story that we'll talk about a little later. One other update that I'll give you is a Holocaust memorial in Kyiv was also targeted and destroyed by the Russians. It's the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial. So for those of you who are unfortunately repeating Russian propaganda about how Russians had no choice but to invade the sovereign country in an effort to root out Nazism, just understand that that is a ridiculous propagandistic talking point, especially when you consider the Nazi elements within Russia versus Ukraine. But with that said, Cenk, I have a lot more updates. Before I get to them, what do you think?
Yeah, so first of all, so you understand why there's a fog. Obviously there's, it's hard to get information out of a war zone, but also The United Nations is the most careful, so they'll say 13 children killed because that's absolutely confirmed, whereas Zelensky gave a speech earlier today where he said there were 16 children killed in just their second largest city. They might both be right, it's just the UN might not have caught up to those numbers, and by the way, one of them could be wrong. So, but overall, could Russia escalate more? Of course, in fact, we're going to tell you a little bit later in the program about how they've readied their nuclear submarines, and that is very, very frightening. And there's a lot more escalation before you get to nukes. But at the same time, have civilians died? No question. Have civilian buildings been hit? No question, it's on video. And so civilians, children have been killed, no doubt about it at all. And we have to say it in those strong terms because there's so much propaganda everywhere. I mean, to Anna's point about Putin said he's doing this for denazification. I mean, come on, who are you kidding, right? And then you bomb a Holocaust memorial. I don't know that they did it on purpose, but that's what happens when you cross a border and invade a country, kind of like the Nazis did, with no justification, etc. You can say, hey, there was justification for some of their concerns about their own security, etc. That is different than a justification for invading all of Ukraine. There is no justification for that. None, none, none. A war of aggression, yes, and a similarity and analogy to the Nazis crossing borders and invading countries while pretending to do it for homeland security is an apt analogy. Yes, it is. And in the beginning, the Germans didn't start killing everyone. They did a lot of propaganda. They crossed borders, they took over countries, and then things got worse and worse until at least 13 million civilians were killed. And so we don't want to go there, and so what Putin is doing is unacceptable. Now, as we've been the first to tell you, if Russia wins, it's a disaster, but if Russia loses or is about to lose, things get arguably perhaps even more dangerous. And so now that's why I present to you this good news that Russia is not doing well militarily or strategically, but as we get that good news and we cheer for the Ukrainian people, we're also very worried about what Russia might do next.
Right. One of the other things that has not been confirmed yet, although Ukrainian officials claim that this is the case, again, it has not been confirmed, I want to be clear. But there are already claims that Belarus is assisting Putin with this invasion. Ukraine claims that Belarus is actually sending its own troops. And if that is confirmed, it gives you a sense of just how much of a miscalculation this was for Vladimir Putin. The thinking was that this would be a quick war. He would be able to overthrow Zelensky and implement some sort of puppet regime that would do his bidding for him. But it hasn't worked out well for him. And take this with a grain of salt as well, although I think it's plausible for sure. Putin is furious at how things are going, and I think that you can kind of see how furious he is in how much more aggressive he's become and how much more aggressive Russia has become in terms of striking residential areas, striking that television tower, striking a Holocaust memorial. They've done the same with hospitals, for instance, sending a 40-mile-long Russian convoy to Kyiv. I mean, these are very clear signs of escalating the situation, becoming much more aggressive. And to your point earlier about potential nuclear war, this is also terrifying, although the Biden administration and our European allies are trying to de-escalate as much as possible. You know, Putin threatened the West with nuclear weapons, and now we have some more updates on that. So I want to go to graphic 6 real quick. Russian nuclear submarines sailed off for drills in the Barents Sea, and mobile missile launchers roamed snow forests Tuesday in Siberia after Putin ordered his nation's nuclear forces put on high alert. Russia's Northern Fleet said in a statement that several of its nuclear submarines were involved in exercises designed to train maneuvering in stormy conditions. It said several warships tasked with protecting northwest Russia's Kola Peninsula, where several naval bases are located, would join the maneuvers. Now, I mean, look, again, it's clear that he's escalating things not just with his rhetoric, but also with his actions, whether it be these drills involving nuclear capabilities, and also with the missile strikes that we're seeing in major cities across Ukraine.
So 2 important things here. When they get to Kyiv and that gigantic convoy of tanks, artillery, etc., arrives and circles the city, then we're gonna see, okay, what's actually gonna happen? Are they gonna overwhelm Ukraine and Kyiv in particular, obviously there? Is there going to be mass bloodshed, thousands of civilians being killed regularly? Or is something else going to happen? It's hard to tell. So how much of their jets are they gonna use? How true is it that the Ukrainians have shot down a number of Russian fighters? I mean, if they're shooting down Russian jets, then their defenses are not that bad. And then they're using a unique tactic that honestly, we told you about here about a decade ago, not us, Wes Clark Jr., who used to be a host here. So let me tell you about that real quick, then I wanna go to the nukes. They're using Turkish drones to hit the incoming tanks and artillery. They're sitting ducks. They're in a 40-mile convoy. One of the reasons that Putin is furious is how slow it's going. They're having trouble with fuel, they're having trouble with logistics, and in one day they went 3 miles. So that's pretty pathetic.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, I don't know to what degree the Ukrainians are also holding back, because man, all of that equipment is totally sitting ducks. So what Wes told us a long time ago, it might have been close to a decade ago, and he was in the military. Obviously, his dad is Wesley Clark, a former head of NATO command as general, and Wes said, "Look, I don't think anyone understands what's actually going to happen if there's warfare between 2 major military powers. In the old days, America owned the skies, but he said now there's drones. What if the Chinese, if we were in a conflict with them, sent out 1,000 drones at once? Well, there goes our air superiority. They'll literally run into our planes. It doesn't matter that they're unmanned drones. They can produce 10,000, 100,000 of them, and then now the drones are armed. So, I mean, it's not like, no disrespect to my own folks, right? But Turks aren't known for the best, most sophisticated weaponry, right? But Turkish drones are shooting down Russian tanks left and right. And by the way, it's not Turkey doing it. Turkey's a NATO country. They just happened to buy it from Turkey. And these also worked unfortunately, in Azerbaijan, and they were devastating. So these drones have changed warfare, and Putin might not have been ready for it. And so he's obviously not ready for what's happened, because he is normally very cool, calm, and collected. And now he's yelling at people. He's yelling at people on television. He looks unhinged, which then brings us to the nukes. Look, he's now saying, yeah, our nukes are ready and our subs are in the water to protect Russia. Who's attacking Russia? No, as offensive weapons. And look, we're now taking a certain percentage chance with the whole world, with humanity. It's just one guy. What if he's mentally unbalanced? We keep projecting our sanity onto him. But we did that here at home. How'd that turn out for us? It turns out 1/3 of this country is totally nuts. Or 1/6 believe that people eat children on behalf of Satan. So 1/6 of humanity is totally and utterly nuts everywhere. And it's not like Putin, a strongman, a tyrant, is necessarily known for stability. So he's done horrible things, vicious things. He hasn't been known for being mentally unstable, don't get me wrong, but we're taking a chance with all of humanity.
And look, Biden, for his part, has really gone out of his way to attempt to de-escalate things, especially when it comes to the nuclear threats coming from Russia. In fact, there have been multiple reporters who have asked the Biden administration if Americans should be concerned about nuclear war, and he says no, absolutely not. While Russia keeps using these threats of nuclear war, the West is not retaliating or doing the same, which is good news. But the thing that really does concern me is Putin a rational actor, right? Because if he is a rational actor, then you can at least kind of predict what motivates him, what the incentives and disincentives are. He has completely destroyed the Russian economy with this invasion. Clearly, he has invaded Ukraine with this massive miscalculation. Innocent people are dying as a result of that on both sides. Well, I wouldn't say both sides. I mean, you have Russian troops in Ukraine, a sovereign country, but Russian troops are dying as well, I should say that. And so I don't know what's gonna happen. This is one of the issues where I really feel uncomfortable having any kind of prediction whatsoever. But Cenk, you're absolutely right in that this is a huge threat, a huge risk. And the idea of nuclear war being on the table is absolutely terrifying. And what could make it worse, what could escalate it, is what the United States and our European allies are being asked to do, which is to implement a no-fly zone above Ukraine.
No way,
and we'll talk about that in more detail in a later story, but that would escalate the situation. The question is, what do you do in response to this Russian aggression toward Ukraine?
No, I actually want to give Biden credit here. Look, things can change, but as things stand now, I think he's actually done a great job of balancing things. So in the beginning, we were worried his sanctions weren't tough enough. Now they're really tough. And so the ruble's down to a penny. The stock markets in Russia are closed. They're totally cut off from financing from the rest of the world. Switzerland and Monaco is saying they're also going to apply sanctions and not do their standard neutrality was huge. A ton of Russian oligarch money was sitting there. And so Putin is frazzled. He thought Biden and Europe was going to be weak. Their response has not been weak. It has been very, very strong. But at the same time, Biden has not crossed the line. If you do a no-fly zone and an American shoots down a Russian jet, we're at war. A no-fly zone is war. And so, no. That is what risks nuclear holocaust. That isn't just about protecting Americans. That's about protecting the whole world. Our hearts go out to the Ukrainians. And it is horrible to see them fighting there by themselves with incredible courage. And so if you're a decent person, your heart goes out to them and you want to protect them. You want to do a no-fly zone, et cetera, to protect them, but you can't because it endangers them more, it endangers all of us more. And so look, and in a democracy, we have some checks and balances. At the end of the day, the commander-in-chief is supposed to be able to order it on his own. But as you saw at the end of the Trump administration, when his entire cabinet, including his closest advisors, thought he was mentally unstable, General Mark Milley called other major powers and said, don't worry, we're not gonna let him do anything stupid, okay? And that's because his own cabinet, people like Mnuchin were considering using the 25th Amendment because they thought the president had lost his mind, which by the way, they were right. Trump has been mentally unstable for a long time, but at the very end was deeply unstable. But in Russia, I don't know that there are any such checks. So if Putin says press the button, they're probably gonna press the button. And that's just one man who control the fate of this whole planet.
I want to reset to talk a little bit about Zelensky's speech before the European Parliament and kind of juxtapose that with how Sergei Lavrov was treated by the UN. So let's discuss that quickly. Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, made an appeal to the European Parliament to allow Ukraine to join the European Union. Now, his speech was so powerful and so emotional that even the translator lost his composure. Let's take a look at the first video.
We are fighting just for our land and for our freedom. Despite the fact that all large cities of our country are now blocked, nobody is going to enter and intervene with our freedom and country. And believe you me, every square of today, no matter what it's called, it's going to be called, as today, Freedom Square.
And he mentions Freedom Square because of the attacks that Ukraine has been dealing with, the lives that were lost with these Russian attacks. And it was a powerful speech, and he's honestly a pretty strong leader. I mean, when you think about other countries that are under attack and how quickly their presidents or prime ministers or leaders are evacuated out of the country, It's easy to juxtapose those situations with what we're seeing in Ukraine, with Zelensky not only remaining in Ukraine, but continuing to fight and continuing to boost the morale of Ukrainian citizens and the Ukrainian soldiers who continue to fight despite all odds, really. I mean, again, Putin really saw this as something that would be easy to carry out. It was a huge miscalculation on his part. It's taking much longer than he expected. Logistically, it looks like the Russian troops are really struggling. I hope it remains that way. I hope this ends as soon as possible. And they are planning on holding another round of potential peace talks. So hopefully that goes better than the first round of talks. But Cenk, before we go to more video of this, any thoughts?
Yeah, so CNN also did an interview with Zelensky in his bunker, and he's also using media brilliantly. And my God, he's done a fantastic job. I mean, he's checked off every box. Smart, brave, the good guy. But guys, good guy or bad guy, that kind of courage actually does swing conflicts. It swings momentum. It's real. We're all humans, and it affects us psychologically. So I'll give you an example from a guy who's not necessarily a good guy, Erdogan. When they were doing the coup in Turkey, it's always impossible to know to what degree this is true, right? But the story was, and it affected the public, that they bombed the hotel that Erdogan was in when they were doing the coup. They got him onto the plane safely, and they said, where should we fly? Switzerland, or where should we go? Because they're doing the middle of a coup and they're trying to kill you. He said, no, fly right back into the middle of Istanbul where they're doing the coup, and we're gonna land the plane in the middle of Istanbul because that's our city. And when he did that, his side, which by the way is not my side in Turkey, was not on the side of the coup either. It's complicated, but his side went ballistic. They loved it. They swarmed the tanks on foot and lost a lot of civilians doing that, but they would not let the tanks go forward. Okay, so now when Zelensky comes and says, no, I stay and I fight. And he has so many great quotes, but I'll give you one of them. He said, the Americans called him for an evacuation because that's normal protocol. And he said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. The real fight is here. Oh, come on, who doesn't love this guy? And he doesn't have any of the baggage of Erdogan or anyone else. He just appears to be a good guy with incredible courage and a strong fight in him. That's made a giant difference in this war. The Russians did not expect the Ukrainians to be this strong. They're in for a rude awakening. So I love what the Ukrainians are doing.
So you're definitely seeing strength from Zelensky and Ukrainians, and you're also seeing this united front, internationally speaking, to condemn Putin. Some countries are trying to straddle a little bit because of their economic interests with Russia, but they aren't saying that what Putin's doing is okay, with the exception of Belarus. Belarus seems to be on the side of Vladimir Putin unequivocally here. Now, with that said, Sergei Lavrov was treated the way that you would expect the way you would expect him to be treated on the international stage. So he's the foreign minister of Russia, and he was about to speak when diplomats decided they weren't so interested. Let's go to A3.
Tiene la palabra Su Excelencia el señor Sergei Lavrov, ministro de Asuntos Extranjeros de la Federación Rusa. Tiene la palabra Su Excelencia.
Уважаемые дамы и господа,
So for those of you listening to the audio version of the show, more than 100 diplomats at the UN walked out just as the Russian foreign minister was gonna speak.
Yeah, and so I looked at his speech. Almost everything in the speech was a lie. So obviously the move was symbolic, but also there really wasn't anything to listen to anyway. So he didn't come with any kind of compromise, with any kind of hope. He just came with, oh my God, we're the victims here, and there was nothing we could do but invade that other country. So everyone was right to leave, and it was a powerful moment. You see, Zelensky in his basically close to military fatigues, saying, hey, there he is, right? They bombed our Freedom Square, and from now on, everything is going to be Freedom Square. They killed all these children. And then Lavrov comes with a bunch of BS about, oh, poor put upon Russia, we had to kill them all. No, you get up, you leave the room, and and guys, it's not just, ha, we showed you. No, this makes a giant difference because the most important part of the solidarity is walling off Russia economically. And so if all of those countries remain united in their opposition to Russia, I don't know how long Russia can last. I don't know how long Ukraine can last when they start bombing Kyiv, but Russia economically is so badly damaged, they might be on more borrowed time. Again, look, this is important. Putin did not expect this kind of solidarity that you're seeing visibly in that tape, okay? So he thought, well, look, I did Chechnya and I brutalized them, I massacred them, and nobody cared. Now, but Chechnya was more considered an internal affair. It doesn't make it right, but it was, the West did not have as much sympathy. Others might have had sympathy, but the West is where the power is, right? And the Chechens are largely Muslims. And then he took a piece of Ukraine and he didn't get a lot of pushback. And then in Syria, massacre after massacre, right? And no one cared. But Syria was a mess, it was a civil war, people couldn't tell who was on what side. There were good guys and bad guys all over the place, and it was also brown people and Muslims, and no one cared, right? So he assumed this is gonna be easy and no one's gonna care. Well, he was wrong, because the West looks at Ukrainians and goes, there but for the grace of God go I. They can relate to Ukrainians. Now that's not right. You wish that they could relate to the Syrians, the Chechens. What the Saudis are doing to Yemen is outrageous. We wish that everyone would relate just as much to those people.
I mean, we're bombing Somalia as we speak. Let's also be clear about that.
Exactly. So while we're being heroic against Russia, we're doing terrible things in other countries. But like it or not, that's the facts on the ground. And when all those Europeans and all those Americans see people they know, like Klitschko, who's a former heavyweight champion, saying, I will stay and I will fight, they get riled up. And let's be honest, they see white people that look like them and they think, oh, I saw a video of a white kid who got bombed and then killed and the doctors are crying in the hospital, right? I care about it whether it's a white kid, a brown kid, or a black kid, and I'm not impugning bad intent on anyone, right? It's just natural human instinct that they go, oh my God, that looks like my kid, right? And so all of the West is like, oh no, hell no, you're not doing this. One other factor is that, look, land wars in Europe don't end well. And so now he's in Europe, so obviously the Europeans care and they remember what the Germans did.
Right.
And so they don't want to repeat that mistake of appeasement. So that is why Putin miscalculated on a grand scale.
Right, and I do think that he felt he had way more leverage because of the fact that it's an oil producing country than he really had. So it's interesting to see the unity, hopefully it continues, but more importantly, hopefully the war ends. So let's cross our fingers that the next round of talks end with some sort of ceasefire because innocent people are losing their lives as a result of this aggression. We got to take a break. When we come back, we'll delve into the topic of a possible no-fly zone and why it's a bad idea. Come right back.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Anna, take it away.
There are growing calls for a no-fly zone to prevent Vladimir Putin and Russia from continuing to rain terror on Ukraine. But while that might seem like a strategy that could make sense to protect Ukrainian civilians, fact of the matter is it escalates the war further and could lead to more innocent people and innocent lives being lost. Now, one of the individuals calling for a no-fly zone is Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine. In fact, President Joe Biden has said that he will not support a no-fly zone, and Zelensky was asked about Biden's views on that during a recent interview with CNN. Let's hear what Zelensky had to say.
The United States has said that it will not enforce a no-fly zone over this country, and it won't put boots on the ground. But do you think it is now time for President Biden and other Western countries to reconsider that and to help you, not just with military aid, but with manpower?
I've already turned to some foreign leaders with this request. I believe that leaders must support democratic states of the world who are keen to defend such principles. The powerful issue of closing the airspace helps us tremendously. This does not mean dragging NATO into this war. We spoke many times with President Biden, and I'm thankful for him for these opportunities and support, but they also did not hear me. I've been telling them that Ukraine will fight hardest of all. You will see, but us alone against Russia, we would not be able to do it.
So Zelensky is clear on that. There have been other officials from Ukraine who have also aggressively called for a no-fly zone. But here in the United States, there are some lawmakers who are asking for the same, particularly Republican lawmakers, including GOP Senator Roger Wicker, who called for a no-fly zone in a recent interview with Huffington Post. Clearly, he says, in the absence of a UN resolution which Russia would veto, a strong coalition of like-minded nations should step in and seriously consider this no-fly zone. In the House, Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger asked for a similar strategy. The fate of Ukraine is being decided tonight, but also the fate of the West. Declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine at the invitation of their sovereign government. Disrupt Russia's air ops to give the heroic Ukrainians a fair fight. It's now or later. And there are other examples that I want to share with you in just a moment. In fact, why don't I go to it now? Because this video is powerful. And despite how powerful it is, I still think it's a bad idea to implement a no-fly zone. I'll explain why in just a minute. But let's go to this next video, which features a Ukrainian activist by the name of Daria Kalunik, who is furious with Boris Johnson for also refusing to support a no-fly zone. Let's watch.
Imagine crossing the border with a baby or with 2 children. I'm so glad that Samantha Power is coming here to the border from the Polish side. Let her come to the border from Ukrainian side and see that. Britain guaranteed our security under Budapest Memorandum. So you're coming to Poland. You're not coming to Kyiv, Prime Minister. You're not coming to Lviv because you are afraid. Because NATO is not willing to defend. Because NATO is afraid of World War III, but it is already started. And these are Ukrainian children who are there taking the hit. You're talking about more sanctions, Prime Minister, but Roman Abramovich is not sanctioned. He's in London. His children are not in the bombardments. His children are there in London. Putin's children are in Netherlands, in Germany, in mansions. Where are all these mansions seized? I don't see that.
So the US has stayed committed to refusing to implement a no-fly zone. We'll go to Jen Psaki's statement on it in just a second. But Cenk, do you watch those videos and feel at all persuaded that we should go in that direction?
No, not 1%. So not because it's not heartbreaking. She's absolutely right. It's totally heartbreaking. Like I said earlier in the show, I watch a kid get killed and the doctors are crying, and you think that maybe the kid's gonna make it. They bring it to the hospital, you see it in the video, and then she doesn't make it. And so if you're anywhere near a decent person, you wanna help. But a no-fly zone doesn't help Ukraine or anyone else. Now, it seems like it helps Ukraine. Of course, it looks like, hey, you're gonna protect their skies, and then maybe they could win on the ground, right? But the minute you put US jets, British jets, etc., in the sky over Ukraine, and the Russian jets are there at the same time, they're gonna fire on each other. Right. And the minute they fire on each other, we are in a war with Russia. And the US and Russia have 90% of the nukes in the world. We can destroy all of humanity. How does that help Ukraine? So guys, as frustrating as it is, you have to be disciplined here. And it's not like we're not doing anything. If we were doing nothing, I'd be furious. In fact, in the first couple of days, it seemed like our sanctions were not nearly tough enough, and we were furious on this show. And we called Biden weak, and we said, what's the matter with you? He didn't even sanction Putin in the beginning. When they actually invaded Ukraine, I thought that was outrageous. But now, he has done all of the sanctions that you could do except for oil. And they could even do that, and that's arguable. But as things stand now, I mean, it looks like they've broken the Russian economy's back, and just in 5 days. And Putin is frazzled, he's yelling at people on TV, it's unprecedented. Their troops are bogged down. So here we seem to be doing relatively okay, and by the way, it could change at any moment, we know that. And Kyiv could be an absolute slaughterhouse. They've got a 40-mile convoy of artillery and tanks headed there now. We understand all of that, and the pressure will build. But getting everyone killed, including the people in Ukraine, isn't going to help.
Right, and of course, Putin has already threatened using nuclear capability in response to all of this, which is terrifying as is. It's unclear whether he's bluffing or not, but you have the United States and its Western allies attempting to de-escalate any talk of potential nuclear war, and that's the responsible thing to do. Also, I think Jen Psaki did a decent job in responding to questions in regard to why the United States does not want to implement this no-fly zone. Remember, guys, no-fly zone is not like the Iron Dome where it's just shooting down missiles and those types of attacks. It means that we would shoot down Russian planes. We would be in direct military conflict with Russia. It is a severe escalation in this war. So that's why it's a bad idea. That's why I think that it would actually lead to more people, including innocent Ukrainian civilians, losing their lives. And so let's go to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki and how she answered a question about this.
Is there any way in which the U.S. would support a no-fly zone over Ukraine?
Well, here's what's important for everybody to know about a no-fly zone. What that would require is implementation by the U.S. military. It would essentially mean the U.S. military would be shooting down planes, Russian planes. That is definitely escalatory. That would potentially put us into a place where we're in a military conflict with Russia. That is not something the president wants to do.
So that's a no on that.
Those are all the reasons why that's not a good idea.
And Cenk, there are some Republican lawmakers who agree with that take as well, including little Marco Rubio weighs in on this. He has the right take and says, if they were to implement a no-fly zone, that would mean World War III. And I think he's right about that.
So now this is an interesting topsy-turvy world situation here because we warned you about the new Republicans that are friendly to the Democrats, right? Before, no Republicans were friendly to Democrats, but now you've got Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, but we said beware of Republicans bearing gifts. So they're all neocons. And so in some ways, they're the most sane, but in other ways, they're the most dangerous of the Republicans. They love war, they love to start any war, and there's Kinzinger all of a sudden saying, oh, no fly zone, like it's no big deal. Now let's go ahead right into World War III. No, I'm not interested in those neoconservatives. We warned you about them as Pelosi's hugging them nonstop. And a lot of the Democrats are warmongers too, so thank God that Biden hasn't gone further and listened to these idiots. Now, the other part of it is, Trump's a mess, right? So he has no discernible ideology. So at one point he'll say, oh, I'll be tougher on Russia. And then he'll say, well, the Russians, why don't they just take Ukraine? Or they're so smart for attacking and invading Ukraine. By the way, what part of Putin looks smart right now?
Right.
Trump's been saying for a whole week about how smart Putin is.
He said it during CPAC over this past weekend.
Yeah, 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Right? And Putin is now bogged down in Ukraine. He's cut off financially from the rest of the world. He looks like a mess. And he's threatening nuclear war. What part of that is smart, you dumbass? Okay, but that's Trump. But on the other hand, he started a movement in the right wing, or he took advantage of a movement that was already there, but publicized it and amplified it, that is against endless wars. That's a great development. So now we have some significant portion of the right wing, and Marco Rubio is a warmonger. He's a neocon too, but he put his finger to the wind and he was like, oh, most Republican voters don't want war. They agree with what they think Trump is saying.
Right.
So he's headed in that direction. Good. I'm happy to meet the right wing on the no war stance. And guys, we didn't want things to escalate before the war, and we criticized Biden for being too aggressive against Russia and in regards to NATO, etc. But by the way, as we said afterwards, it looks like, based on the evidence we got afterwards, Putin was going to invade no matter what.
Right.
So it turns out Biden was right.
Yeah.
And here he is being restrained. He is not going towards the neocons, and that's definitely a good thing.
And I want to just add some more weight to what you're saying in regard to how NATO actually wasn't the issue. Look, that was, I took Russia's security concerns seriously. It's not about NATO. They would have done this whether or not Ukraine was really going to join NATO. Remember, a few days before the Russian invasion, Zelensky made it clear that he was going to drop any intention of even joining NATO, and they did the invasion anyway. And prior to the invasion, Putin gave this speech where he made it abundantly clear that this is about expanding the Russian Empire. That's what this is about. It's about blood and soil. That he gave a blood and soil speech. There's no question about that. And so you gotta call it like it is. We were wrong in our calculation, but we gotta be honest with you guys and let you know.
No, I don't Anna, I don't accept that we were wrong. We should not, I don't think we should be expanding NATO to Ukraine. I didn't think we needed to go down that road. I didn't think we needed to lose the moral high ground and antagonize, etc.
Sure.
But what we're pointing out now is based on the evidence we got afterwards, it turns out it didn't matter. Even if it was the wrong thing to do, it doesn't matter if we did the right thing. Putin would have invaded anyway. So that all his preparations were in that direction, etc. So I don't think we were wrong at all to say, hey, America should do as much as possible to de-escalate. As it turns out, it wouldn't have made a difference.
Right. All right, well, we got to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the refugee crisis. As I mentioned, 660,000 Ukrainians have fled Ukraine. But there is some discrimination in regard to which Ukrainian refugees neighboring countries are willing to allow in. We'll give you those details and more when we come back.
Back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. A YouTube member wrote in. Now, remember, we can't verify these, but members are more likely to be right just because they're financially invested in the show, etc., and they've been for a long time. So Kim says, hi Cenk, I'm in Ukraine fighting. I got here yesterday with 6 others when we're getting ready to leave for Kyiv. I'll keep you updated here if that's okay with you.
Wow.
Wow. So it has begun. People are starting to go into Ukraine to help their brothers and sisters fight against the Russians. Again, I can't verify it, but wow. So Kim, you can reach out to us through email, help us with the verification, etc. And that then we can keep giving updates. Yep. Okay. All right, Anna, let's do it.
Well, the outpouring of support for Ukrainian refugees is fantastic to see. Unfortunately, there are increasing reports that there has been some discrimination among neighboring countries in regard to which Ukrainians they're willing to open their arms to. In fact, it's becoming so much of a problem that the UN has even addressed it. The United Nations has admitted that some non-European refugees have faced racism while trying to flee to safety at Ukraine borders. The organization's High Commissioner for Refugees acknowledged this in a statement, and this comes after a number of Black, South Asian and Mediterranean refugees shared accounts of being blocked at borders while trying to make crossings, while white Ukrainians have been prioritized. Now, we've been talking a little bit about the difference, the double standard that we've noticed with, let's say, Muslim refugees coming from Middle Eastern countries versus Ukrainians and how they've been accepted with open arms. And we love to see it with refugees regardless, right? Like, we don't want Ukrainians to be rejected. It's actually wonderful to see that. It's one of the things that's giving me a little bit of hope in humanity. But to see that this is, that they're even picking and choosing Ukrainian refugees based on their skin color, based on their race, is so incredibly depressing. And the way that they're talked about, the way that refugees are talked about in the media when it comes to this particular war is also pretty devastating and depressing to see. So I want to start with the first example. This is Charlie de Agada, who is reporting live from Kyiv. And just pay close attention to the wording that's being used when describing some of the refugees here.
This isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
Are you choosing any wording carefully there? Because that was insane. That was insane. And that's not even the only example I've got for you, Cenk.
Yeah, so there's two different racial elements here, unfortunately. One is we've seen how folks respond when it's darker skinned and particularly Muslim refugees. So the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have been brutal. And remember, the people that are coming in from Iraq and Afghanistan were our top allies in those countries. Translators, people who risked their lives to help American soldiers, sometimes saved American lives, right? And even so, we just showed you a video last week from here in Los Angeles of a woman going, I'd rather save animals than Afghan refugees.
It's disgusting.
And so now on the other hand, the Ukrainians are being welcomed with open arms. And I want to double down on what Anna said. That's fantastic. I want people to accept Ukrainian refugees. That's awesome. Thank you for being open-hearted about that. And of course, there's jokes now going around. I mean, I told you guys yesterday about the Turks were joking about, well, the Ukrainians, yeah, we could have them here too. And remember, the Turks are Muslims. So my point here is that there's a lot of things that go into these calculations, right? But yes, when you stop people and go, you're white, you're black, or you're Indian, you're not in, that's pretty clear, right? Let alone the macro ways that we have dealt with refugees across the world and here in America. Okay.
I just don't get it. I don't get it. We're talking about refugees from the same country experiencing the same crisis and the same war. No. How do you have empathy or sympathy for one group of refugees coming from the same country that's being, hit with the same war, and somehow dismiss or belittle the trauma that refugees of color are experiencing in the same conflict? How is that possible? Like, I don't understand it. I just don't get it.
Look, I get why. And so the reason is people unfortunately are intensely selfish. So whatever feels like closer to their identity, they empathize with more, they relate to more. It feels like them. But anything that makes him feel like someone else makes him feel like the others. And unfortunately, skin color is the easiest one. They go, she looks like my daughter. They don't look anything like any of us. And by the way, it's the great majority of the time it's subconscious, right? There's plenty of times where it's conscious, right? Don't get me wrong. But I bet you a lot of the people that were at those borders that were stopping the black and brown folks, and they would have stopped someone like me, probably thought, I'm not racist at all. I don't know what you're talking about. I just don't know where they're from, right? They're crossing the Ukrainian border. Where do you think they're from? But yeah, that's what people do. And then in terms of helping Ukraine, we've basically done a worldwide blockade of Russian money, and it's crippled their economy. We could have done that when the same Russian government and the same Russian leader was bombing the hell out of Syria and killed, hundreds of thousands of civilians in Syria? But we chose not to do that. And again, it's not black and white in the sense that, well, Syria was in the middle of a civil war and it was harder to suss out who the good guys and bad guys were, etc. But Bashar al-Assad's a bad guy. That one was not hard to suss out, okay? And of course, Putin helped him. But let alone when America invaded Iraq and Afghanistan and we killed hundreds of thousands of civilians and nobody did anything to us, right? Because yes, if they don't look like you, if you can't identify them based on race, religion, and other factors, you're less sympathetic.
I mean, how many countries have we destabilized through orchestrated coups, through invasions, preemptive strikes, as we did in Iraq, and then after destabilizing these countries, after bombing them to smithereens, we have the audacity to turn our backs on the civilians who are fleeing for safety. Right, and I'm not just talking about the Middle East, I'm also talking about Latin American countries that we have destabilized because we didn't like their leaders and we overthrew them. Like, it's just, we do have to take responsibility for that. So while in the context of this war in Ukraine, obviously we're talking about neighboring European countries, the United States certainly is not innocent when it comes to this issue.
And by the way, let's give a little bit more nuance here. The Germans in particular, but a lot of the European countries took in a lot of Muslim refugees. They did, right? They did way better than America in taking in refugees. So credit where credit is due. So it's, again, not just black and white issue. And then if it sounds like I'm trying to excuse those behavior, I'm not, in terms of the turning back black and brown folks at the border. I'm explaining why it happens. But should it happen? Of course it shouldn't happen. They're just the same as, it's so frustrating for us that sees the whole world as one, that sees human beings as indistinguishable. But even in America, not even in America, a lot of times in America's the worst at it, they really think Indonesians, that's not me, Americans are of course more valuable than Indonesians. They think it's outrageous when progressives say, yeah, an Indonesian life is worth the same as an American life. They genuinely think that's an outrageous thing to say. Whereas I view every human the same. But yet we have reporters saying, well, Ukraine's a civilized country.
Now, we have another video I want to get to. By the way, I should note that the CBS contributor, the video that we initially showed you featuring Charlie D'Agata, he later apologized and said he regretted his comments. So I just want to be fair and note that he did apologize. Now, an NBC correspondent, though, used similar language, but I also want to give you a little more context here. She was answering a question about the double standards in regard to refugees. I think that context matters and it puts her answer in, I think, a better light, but nonetheless, listen to the way that this NBC reporter handled this issue.
Just to put it bluntly, these are not refugees from Syria. These are refugees from neighboring Ukraine. I mean, that, quite frankly, is part of it. These are Christians, they're white.
They're Christians, they're white. Now, I think she was attempting to be, and she was being very honest about the decisions that are being made by these neighboring countries when it comes to who they allow in. And it's just jarring to see it communicated so bluntly, but it's the truth. I think that is what's happening here. There is a very clear reason why certain Ukrainian refugees are not being allowed into these neighboring countries.
Yeah, I actually am going to give those reporters a little bit of a break. They're live on air. They're stumbling over their words. They don't have a prompter there. We don't have a prompter either. If we're being generous, I think she was trying to make the same point that I am.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too.
Yeah, and so, and the guy said he regrets it, et cetera. But Textan, one of our members, wrote in, you don't say, guys, racist white people turning away brown people at a border. What sort of nefarious country would do something like that? Obviously, point well taken. Of course, that's exactly what we do at our border, right? But, and remember, guys, it's not, the Republicans painted as like, oh, illegal immigrants and they're just coming for our jobs, et cetera. No, a lot of them are also refugees from violence-torn countries in Latin America. So we do it on the regular.
Yep. All right, well, we got to take a break. When we come back for the second hour of the show, we will play some video from CPAC. David Schuster spoke to some of the CPAC attendees to get their thoughts on Vladimir Putin and this Russian invasion. And I thought the answers were fascinating. So we've got that and more when we come back. Don't miss it. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.